People, a 5013 nonprofit based in the San Francisco Bay Area. In July 2021, Research to the People joined Stanford Medicine under Michael Snyder, PhD, chair of the genetics department. Research to the People at Stanford is a program for oncology patients who have exhausted their clinical options and need to move beyond standard of care. We generate advanced multi-omics data, run cutting-edge analysis to interrogate new therapeutic possibilities. Our program also leads discovery and AI innovation initiatives for complex multi-systematic disease. Previously, in addition to several early-stage healthcare tech startup explorations, Peter started healthcare.mn, a healthcare startup tech community in Minneapolis and one of the first co-working spaces for startups in Minnesota. He studied Chinese language and literature at the University of Minnesota. Let's give a huge round of applause for Peter.
All right, hey, all. Let's see. First of all, thank you so much to the organizers for having me. I feel really aligned with the mission of what you guys are talking about here, and I love talking to younger folks that are at the beginning of their careers or entrepreneurial journey, and really eager to explore the different paths that you all can take with your skills. So I'll go over my background a bit, entrepreneurial journey, give an overview of what we're doing at Research to the People at Stanford, and we can talk about some entrepreneurial opportunities. So my biggest message to anyone is just that you can create and build whatever you want, like regardless of what your skills are. And I hope that my story helps illuminate that a little bit with going from a liberal arts education to something that's a space that's highly technical, where everyone has a PhD, an MD, or PharmD or other advanced degree. So I attended the prestigious University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, and when I got to college, I had no idea what I wanted to study, but I grew up with 3 adopted Chinese sisters. So when I got to school, I was like, oh, I'll study Chinese language and literature, without any idea for like what where that would lead me in terms of a career. About halfway through my educational journey, I actually I dropped out, which was incredible. I had met this fellow here who became my best friend. His name is Tolbert, and Tolbert was the only person on campus that anyone knew who was doing a tech startup. This was like 2006 or something. Like the only entrepreneur who we really. The only tech entrepreneur we really knew anything about was like Mark Zuckerberg, who just started, the Facebook. And so, I highlight Tolbert for a few reasons. I mean, he's the first person that taught me that if there's a problem that I see in the world, something I don't like, that instead of complaining about it, being mad about it, that I could do something about it through starting a startup or tech, or just start building solutions, and I didn't, that I had the power to do that. Tolbert was someone who I viewed. He was doing a tech startup and he's having success at it, but I viewed him as just making so many wrong moves like all the time. So I was like, if Tolbert can have success doing a tech startup, surely I'll be able to do like so much better, faster, right? So I dropped out and I started my first tech startup in healthcare. So there's startup number 1 that failed, and then there's startup number 2, and then there's startup number 3, and this comprised 5 years of my life, which I always, it's so funny to reference that on stage, right, and be like, oh, these 3 seconds, 5 years of my life down the drain for, like doing startups that didn't work out. I mean, this is some grueling stuff, right? Like some really hard lessons, especially like your parents being like, when are you gonna get a job? When are you gonna have an income? but this was also like, the financial crisis, so there wasn't like many jobs for people that did want jobs anyway. So after these 3 startups, which were all in healthcare, I was pretty frustrated that there was no that it was hard to connect with other founders in that healthcare tech space, and there's just like no community for it. There's no support for it. There's no one like helping me avoid all the dumb mistakes that I made. So I decided to just start like a community for other health tech founders, which was kind of the first successful thing that I did. This group became popular pretty quick in Minneapolis. For those of you who don't know, Minneapolis has got like some really top medical and healthcare institutions like United Health Group. It's a Fortune 5 company, like Medtronic, like Mayo Clinic. They're all based in Minnesota. So after this, this community was becoming a really big community in Minnesota, and a lot of startups. And so I was like, well, I'm eager for us to all have like a space to work at. Let's get us all in the same office. This is kind of like before the WeWork days. So I went and got like a nice like warehouse loft space in downtown, and it ended up being like about 8,000 square feet at its peak. And it was fun times. The local media was like, oh, there's a space for startups in Minneapolis, and it was it was bring all your friends together, work on tech startups together. It was awesome. The problem was that I'd signed a really shitty lease, and there's another startup in town that had raised like $17 million that wanted our space, and so we kind of got well, the whole project kind of it went downhill pretty quickly, and that was this was like everything that I've been working towards for years and years and years, right? It just kind of crashed within months, and so I was really depressed, and I was like, I have to get the hell out of this town, and so I moved to San Francisco, and I just spent like literally just six months just biking around the coastal mountains and just being depressed and like not doing much. I was living in the back seat of my convertible with my bike, and just actually, in retrospect, it was a really fun time. But in the back of my head, I was like, as entrepreneurs do, you're kind of like, okay, what am I going to start next? And you put a lot of pressure on yourself for like, what ideas am I even good at? What am I qualified to do, right? Luckily, this was like around 2015 in the Bay Area, so it's like this sort of the AI boom times, sort of like we have now. And so I looked around the Bay Area, and I was like, how do I learn more about the AI community? Like, where do I go? And there's really no good AI community groups. So I saw that as an opportunity to start building an AI community group in SF. So it was I like to name things very literally. So this one was called Silicon Valley Artificial Intelligence, and the URL is sv.ai. But this group was fun. It was we oriented it towards how AI is being used in life sciences, and it also became pretty popular pretty fast because everyone was super jazzed about this topic. We hosted a lot of early talks about from kids at Stanford, PhD students that were working on applying deep learning in genomics. Folks like Avanti Srikumar, Laszlo Pruzan, and it was a fun time. So we ran, I don't know, maybe a year and a half or so of lecture series about AI, and especially how AI is being used in life sciences. And I was like, we got to do something more than just like a lecture series. And so I was really eager to get some data that we can use as a foundation of an open source project. And around the sort of exactly the same time, I'd met Ono Faber. And this article is from after what we did, but Ono had sequenced. He has a rare cancer, and he had sequenced his genome at the Broad Institute in like 2013, which is still like incredibly expensive and incredibly hard to do. Like the fact that he had whole genome sequencing for his tumor was just unbelievable. He had paid about I think $45,000 out of pocket to get this data. And so I said, hey, Ono, Ono is an entrepreneur too. So I said, hey, Ono, let's do a hackathon with your genomics data. And he said, yeah. And so we launched this event, AI Genomics Hackathon. And Ono and I, we had no idea like what would be able to be accomplished in an event like this, where we're releasing this like incredibly sophisticated data to AI scientists and researchers and biologists to work on over just the course of a weekend. But this event was spectacular. I mean, we had over 400 people apply to join it, and we selected 150 people to participate in person. And we ended up with 25 submissions for what people's analysis of the data, including some really sophisticated analysis. Oh, there's folks that signed up from just all different types of technical and research and biology disciplines. And one of the goals that one of the things that we thought would be most the biggest result from this is just bringing AI folks together with biology folks, and sort of making a template for like how they can sort of interact in a creative fashion, but which was more sort of or less common back then. So we had folks like flying from all over the nation, which was pretty spectacular. There's a kind of a flurry of articles that came out after it, including this one from the team that was being led by Jyotika Varshney from UCSF. Well, so after the success of an event like this, the biggest question is, okay, we just had this big success bringing a patient who basically open sourced their data to an entire community of strangers, right? And it's like, how do we replicate this? How do we find another patient who wants to engage in this format? And I wasn't certain that there was even other patients that would want to make their data, such private data, open like this. But just like a couple weeks after, maybe just like a week after, I got approached by someone who was at the first hackathon and said, hey, can you do the same thing for me? I have a rare kidney cancer. And so then we spent a year building a couple events for our good friend Bill Passman. And so, like the first event, there was just amazing stuff that came out of this event, and things that the patient could actually use to help guide treatment decisions. After Bill's event, we did an event with an undiagnosed patient, who I'm also still good friends with today. And John's story is really interesting because John was a patient who had gone all over the nation and trying to seek advanced data for his condition, an undiagnosed condition, and he had gotten whole genome sequencing at like 3 different top centers across the nation, and every center came back and said, there's nothing genomically wrong with you. We can't find anything. And like John really wasn't willing to accept that as an answer, and so he had good data, and he was like trying to send it to researchers all around, but like researchers they didn't really have a good format for like how to interact with a single patient because they're not clinicians. And so when we got in touch with them, or when he got in touch with us rather, he said that he wanted long-read sequencing, and so we helped facilitate long-read sequencing for John and hosted the hackathon around that data, and we were able to find a TNXB gene mutation with the more sophisticated long-read data that led to a diagnosis for John. So after John, we was a really heavy and pivotal case for us. Hosting an event like this for an undiagnosed patient. John still, despite being having a rare disease, he's still relatively healthy and he's not actively dying. And so these events are fun, right? People come together, they're exploring the data. The next case was just a much different tone. So this case, her name is Lila Jana. She was a well-known entrepreneur in San Francisco, and her case was really severe. She was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive cancer, maybe just about 8 months before. But when this case came to us, the team that was helping her was looking for sort of Hail Marys. Like, what can we do? They had excellent data. They had excellent records, perfectly organized, and they were looking for through the entrepreneurial networks. They were looking for any scientists that could help with the case. And so the case came to us, and I admit I was scared to take on this case because it's so serious, right? It's more than just like a casual hackathon. And I knew that if we took on this case, that it would change our program forever, and I didn't know, and yeah, I was kind of scared. So we organized this case in about a month and a half or so, and we hosted it at Stanford Medicine. We gathered about 40 PhDs and doctors and postdocs together to work on her case. A series of insights came out of it, but she was so sick, she had passed away 2 weeks after the case, and so we weren't able to get her any of the insights, treatments that were indicated. What did come out of this event was that our work caught the eye of Dr. Michael Snyder, the chair of the genetics department at Stanford, and he had invited us to continue this work at Stanford Medicine. So, looking at these cases, I asked, what do all these cases have? The common thread here is, all these patients were in the clinical system for a long time, pursuing the standard clinical treatments, and at some point, the clinical system wasn't giving them what they needed to find answers for their care, and all of them decided that they needed to go outside of the clinical system, outside of the standard of care, if they wanted to, find treatments that could save their life or help diagnose them or anything. I think this is just so important to realize. We have such immense trust in the experts in the clinical system, but there's so much that you can do outside of the system, and it's so difficult. I think it really takes an entrepreneurial mind and a lot of courage and a lot of savviness to start to connect outside of such a rigid system like that, and start to create a new structure that can really serve a patient need. And it's really intimidating. It's intimidating as someone who is not trained in medicine whatsoever, to be interacting with a patient and giving a patient confidence that I can help organize experts around their case to help them. So this is the starting team we assembled at Stanford. The co-founder for the program is Fresha Jahaniani. She's a PharmD with a PhD in pharmacology. Just an absolutely perfect person to start this program with in terms of finding savvy treatments for the patients. Dr. Michael Castro has been involved in all of our cases since Lila. He's an oncologist who's eager to look at molecular data for a patient and prescribe treatments that are outside of the box. And of course, Dr. Snyder and Ben. So the guiding questions that that really lead our work is, how much further can we get in patient cases if we're generating the most advanced data, and if we're running the most advanced analysis on this data. The first problem. Well, go to the next slide. And the format for which we're applying this on is making the data open and hosting open collaborations around that data. So just pulling straight from the tech sort of open source world and applying that to medicine. The data that we're generating is data that you would never have access to in the clinical system. You know, if you have cancer and you're in the clinical system, and you get sequencing data, you know, more often than not, it's going to be like a 500 gene panel. You know, so a whole genome, for reference, is about 20,000 genes. And a 500 gene panel is just looking at like oncodrivers. So, you know, generating this type of data for patients is you need to be really connected in the biotech diagnostic space, and it takes a long time, and it's quite complicated. Luckily, you know, at Stanford we spun up a lot of diagnostics and biotech partners that help generate this data with us, and you know, oftentimes we're such a small volume program that they're donating this data generation to us. So we've run through a lot so far from getting started as an entrepreneur and sort of hosting hackathons. And you know, when we started the program at Stanford, it really was that shift between you know, running hackathons as like a community group to like actually starting a formalized program at a world-leading medical institution, right? It's like just such a profound shift in how we're able to work with patients and what we're able to do for them. You know, just a true privilege to be able to start a program like this at Stanford. So the first two cases that we took on at Stanford were Shirley and Vanessa, who we worked with for about a year and a half each. They became very close friends and collaborators. This is Fresh on the left, and Shirley on the right. Shirley had metastatic ovarian cancer, and she was such a spectacular person because, you know, she was diagnosed in about 2012, 2013, and what she had done as a bioinformatics scientist is she realized the power of sequencing as well, and she went out and got whole genome sequencing that was you know, still extremely hard to get at the time, and she started doing analysis on it herself, and you know, that got her invited to give talks at Harvard and be featured in, you know, quite widely for the work that she was doing on her own tumors. She was introduced to us by Dr. Michael Castro, who you know, later in her disease when it became metastatic, and you know, Shirley, she was an incredible patient to work with because she had such a strong idea of the data that she wanted to generate and the analysis that she wanted to do on it. The other patient that we were working with was Vanessa, and when Vanessa contacted me and I saw that she was a cyclist, I reached out to her right away and was like so excited to meet her. So one of the first things that we did was we went cycling and hiking together. So Vanessa had a rare tumor called a desmoid tumor, and this is a tumor that is technically non-cancerous, so it's not going to metastasize, but it grows. It can grow quite large. And in Vanessa's case, the tumor had started as a small spot on her back and grew to consume her entire back, and you know, along the way it became an open wound, and so you know, it was pressing into her back, into her organs, and it was quite a gruesome case. So in Vanessa's case, she had been on, you know, like 10 lines of therapy, and she was being cycled back onto a drug that she had already failed, so that the doctors knew that she wasn't going to have a sustained response on that drug. And so and she reached out to us, and we started generating data for her. And yeah, along the way with Vanessa, we hosted a little hackathon at Stanford, and then we just got her data out to really bioinformaticians worldwide. Both of these cases were really like worldwide collaborations. Folks all over, submitting analysis on the data. This is Vanessa and I doing a planning session. So these cases are difficult to work on also because we developed such a close relationship with these patients, and they both passed away. That was quite difficult. They both passed away actually within just a few weeks of each other last year. It was sort of a really unexpected part of this journey. So the current status of the program is that we're working on building our next cohort of patients. We've become quite passionate about working with younger patients with rare and aggressive tumors, especially solid tumors and germline mutations. It's just so tragic looking at how these younger folks with like rare and aggressive tumors are sitting in the system, and the standard of care isn't working for them. And so it's just being so up close and personal with some of these patients. We're just so compelled to build a better system for how we can drive more better outcomes for these patients. Sort of going outside of the standard clinical system. Our program is also continuing to work on several rare disease projects, including the hackathon for rare disease. We're excited to bring AI scientists together again to work on building some large language models for hypophosphatasia and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And this is the end of my presentation. In closing, my biggest message is that I strongly believe in folks with liberal arts skills doing things in highly technical spaces where organizing this type of technical talent around problems that people care about can lead to quite successful structures. That's it.
Thank you so much. So now open for Q&A, and thank you, Peter, so much for sharing kind of your journey, your different projects, and also sharing the personal stories of the cases and projects you've worked on. And it's very important and also heavy work. And I'm also here kind of sounds of frustration in some way of like there's these people who really deserve more personalized medicine, but there's so many of them too. What do you see as like hopes you have for like personalized medicine, or like things that you're doing for like hackathons? Like, do you think that would you like to scale these further? Like, do you think that there needs to be more? What do you think is the biggest challenge for there to be like less patients who are kind of stuck in a limbo?
Great question. The question about scaling is one of the first things that people always ask us. First of all, people are like, how are you funding this? And second of all, people are like, how do you scale this? And the answer that I give is, I'm in the Bay Area, right, where it's like everyone is focused on scaling things, and people are like, why are you even working on this if you can't scale it? And I don't know, I'm really proud to work on something that that doesn't scale, at least in its current format. You know, this is such meaningful work, and it's such intellectually challenging work. There's never a day where I don't feel, you know, like the intellectual stimulation of these unsolvable puzzles, you know, bringing people together to solve them. So we're not focused on scaling. What we are focused on is building really, really deep oncology case studies where we can bring the most advanced multi-omic data for a case and make that data open to you know, younger bioinformaticians, medical students, and folks to learn how to really integrate this data into a case and how to you know, translate that to you know, better options for a patient. So it's really more focused on case studies for education.
Thank you for answering.
I feel like a lot of us are, or some of us could be at the stage where you were in, where you were biking around and like not sure what life is ahead of you. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself when you were biking, whether it was day 1, 3 months in, or 5 months into your biking?
I mean, when I was in that stage, I knew that I would do something, right? It's like, but it's like you know, but it's, you just have to. For myself, I just tried a lot of different things. You know, had a false starts on so many different projects, and the advice I like to give too is like, you know, people always, when you're studying something, people always kind of, they're eager to interrogate you on a business model, or like how does something scale, or how does something sustain itself. But when I was studying my things, I had no idea how it would scale. I had no idea how I was going to pay for it. I mean, I wasn't paying myself. It was just something that I felt like needed to exist in the world. And once you start a project like that, especially a project that has like a large you know, social value that's not being met, people come around you and they help you. They help you understand how these things can be more sustainable. And you know, in our case, joining Stanford was one of those moments. So I'm just a huge advocate for people just starting to do something, anything, and then watching and measuring how people come around you, or how people respond to what you're doing.
Thank you.
Well, yes, this is such great work that you're doing, and actually, my last job, I also was able to contribute to a cancer genomics project as well. But I was actually curious if you guys were sort of like expanding into patient care and satisfaction. So you mentioned in the presentation how, and it's so true, like so many people for types of cancers, they have like a lot of dissatisfaction in the standard healthcare system. So I'm wondering if you guys are also thinking about expanding into that. You mentioned that you guys are want to utilize LLMs, so I'm wondering if you guys are sort of like thinking in that direction as well.
Yeah, you know, right now the LLM work that we're doing is a little bit separate than the cancer work. It's you know, it's kind of a problem. Like when you start doing this type of work, you're surrounded by so many smart people that what you can be doing, and like there's just like, you know, 50 different paths that we could go down that would be all just awesome projects. It's a real challenge once you get going to say no to different things. But in terms of patient satisfaction, you know, I like to view our program as operating as much outside of the medical structures as possible. You know, I like to view our program as building a new structure that sits pretty squarely in between the research space and the clinical space. And for folks who aren't embedded in medicine, like the divide between research and clinical is just so bifurcated. It's incredible. It's amazing. You know, the hard to describe until you're in it. But it's a real challenge to sit at that intersection. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for this great presentation. I guess it's more of a technical question regarding when people do have this huge data set of all their genomic data, what do the solutions and the outcomes of these days where the PhDs, do this kind of research, what does that look like, the outcomes and the conclusions that they get from this genomic data?
The outcomes and conclusions of the data. Yeah. So I mean, when the genomic data or like RNA or any of this data is being analyzed, what you're looking for is vulnerabilities in the cancer or pathways or targets. There's a range of different ways to different therapies for cancer, but in terms of like genomics, we're really looking at druggable targets, and so one of the most effective things that we can do for a patient is look at what genes can be targeted that where there's a drug that's already on the market, approved on the market, that can be sort of repurposed for the patient that we're working with. Yeah, and so that's one of the most common things that we've been able to do for the patients is find like in Ono's case, the very first case, he had NF2. Several of the teams found an overexpression of EGFR, and so which is it indicated that he could go onto a breast cancer medication for NF2, and so he did that, and for a year his tumors were shrinking. So that's the easy answer, I guess.
Hi. I think I was really touched by the stories, and it feels like, it's a huge undertaking to, also meet these people who, are giving their data pretty much, and pretty much are, having to do this undertaking to having to actually meet this person and actually, hey, I have all this data, we have the British minds. Do you come into like these hackathons hoping that, you get this greatest a breakthrough, like an insight that helps this patient, and when you don't, like, how is that undertaking for you personally, given that you're speaking to these patients personally?
Yeah. So that's been an anxiety of mine too. It's like, what if we're not able to like generate any good insights? But the truth is that when a patient, we're taking in patients that are quite sick, and patients that have been sick for years, and there's the cancers have mutated many times over from what they were originally. So when a patient is metastatic and you generate advanced data, you're always going to be able to find something. Like there's always going to be something to find there. It's really like selecting what are the best most effective things. So one of the trends today, right now, is combination therapy, like using 3-4 drugs in combination to target multiple things at the same time. And that's it's not something that's done lightly because of potential toxicity and finding the right dose. And so it's like you really need some advanced people and some advanced analysis all coordinating together.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk, and it's really inspiring, kind of personally resonant. You talked about kind of the gulf between the clinical experience and then the research experience, and I know that's something that you're kind of bridging a little bit with your program and just kind of like the culture and experience around that, but from maybe going back to like a Silicon Valley way of thinking in terms of like scale and that, like, how would you think about the role of like technology there, and are there examples of technology you're seeing that are bringing those closer together, or kind of potential questions that you think people should be asking more?
Yeah. So in the Silicon Valley, how like our program relates to the Silicon Valley and the Silicon Valley mindset. When I go to conferences, like diagnostics conferences, there's there's tons of companies that are producing XYZ data, like the most advanced data in the world, and there's tons of companies that are able to do, the most cutting edge analysis on that data in the world. But it's just like none of that actually is getting to patients, and it might not get to patients for like 10 years or sometimes ever, right? And so it's like I'm just enthusiastic to create a bridge between patients and those companies, because like if we can get them a sample, they can run the data, and so it's just creating the structure to get an actual sample to those companies to create the data and to do the analysis. And it's in such small numbers, they're happy to do it, and frankly it benefits them as well, because a lot of these are startups that are understanding how their data or how their analysis can be potentially translated to a clinical utility. So it's like our program is serving in some way the early stage diagnostics and bioinformatics startups.
Yeah, thanks.
So for a lot of your projects, I see a common theme of bringing people together, collaboration, community, from kind of co-working space to also here like bring patients closer to researchers and kind of bring people who maybe like would have missed each other in the institutional setup. So I'm wondering, for maybe folks in here and also someone like me who organizes for Impact Labs, for building community, do you have like lessons or advice or just thoughts of like from your years of like building community, especially bringing like different perspective, since a lot of people you interact with are perhaps data science people or like PhD students, like how do you think about bringing different people together?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that. This is one of the ways that I feel like my Chinese degree actually has helped me in this sense. Is like, when I was when I was young, my parents brought us all to China, right? And our sisters were coming to our family, and it's like, it's just from growing up in suburban Minnesota, it's just a completely different zone, and everyone's interacting much differently than you ever knew. So it's like, I feel like from a young age, I just understood like how to or built those skills of like interacting with people that came from such diverse backgrounds as myself. And I find like it kind of directly translated one for one with like myself interacting with like PhD scientists and folks that are just took such a rigorous track in their skills and their training. Just being able to understand what they value and understand how to orientate what they're interested in into a problem that they want to work on, or just any way of engagement, right? Yeah, being a community builder is something that a lot of us are drawn to, and it's sometimes really thankless work, but it's always energizing to do, and yeah, you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you. Okay, I have another question if no one else. So you shared about kind of different projects you started, and you also shared about kind of when you moved to SF, went through like the biking phase. For a lot of
still in the biking phase.
But I'm very curious about kind of the getting back up part, because for a lot of kind of starter founders, people who want to be founders, like there's a lot of obstacles, and sometimes just things don't happen the way you want, and but for some people maybe getting back up is a very difficult part. So I'm just wondering if you have anything to share from that period of your life of like, I mean, you knew that you were like leaving the place that you're at and you're starting fresh, but are there more to the story there of like how you like rooted yourself and like decided to like start different projects?
Yeah, well, one thing for sure that I like to talk about is like in Minnesota, I felt like I was just banging my head against the wall all the time. I don't know if you guys are from like other places that like Minnesota that may have like a more. Minnesota is really culturally liberal, but like financially conservative, and so it's like not a very good spot for like risk taking and like startups and like big ideas and stuff like that. And so I was just always like banging my head against the wall about like not feeling much support from the broader like business community and whatnot. When I got to Silicon Valley, it's just the complete opposite. I don't know. It's like people pattern match. Like right as we come there and you want to talk about big ideas and you want to talk about your passion for changing the world or whatever. It sounds cliche, but people will bring you in. People will connect you. People will. In my case, like I arrived at Silicon Valley like broke and homeless. Right. It was like. I was living in my car for a bit, but also like other entrepreneurs just invited me to live with them when they had for free when they had open rooms, and like that's like, and I don't know, it was just a beautifully supportive place for myself when I arrived there.
Wonderful to hear. Thank you so much again for Peter for the wonderful talk and Q&A.